Montana Territory, October 1878. The wind kicked up dust as the stagecoach door swung open, and out stepped a woman with hollow eyes and a threadbare satchel clutched tight to her side. Her boots hit the ground with hesitation, not purpose. The town of Dry Creek was small, the kind of place where news traveled faster than a bullet and everyone had an opinion before you had a chance to speak. Quinn Fletcher stood just outside the livery, leaning against a post, chewing a stalk of dry grass. He watched her from beneath the brim of his hat. She looked lost, but she did not look weak. There was something in the way she held her chin, like she had taken hit after hit and still refused to fall. "Name's Quinn," he said, tipping his hat as she passed. "You looking for someone?" She paused. "No. No one's looking for me, and I ain't looking for them," she said quietly. Her voice held a strange mix of steel and sadness. He nodded once, didn't press. Just watched her walk toward the boarding house, shoulders squared like she was daring the world to challenge her. Her name was Penelope Finch. Folks found out quick enough. Moved into the upstairs room at Mrs. Lyle's boarding house. Kept to herself. Took up work cleaning the saloon in the early hours before the drunks cleared out. She never smiled, barely spoke. But every morning she walked down Main Street with her head up, and Quinn noticed. It was the third morning when he saw her slip on the iced porch step. He crossed the street before she hit the ground. "You all right?" he asked, steadying her elbow. She pulled away fast. "I'm fine." "You sure?" "That was a rough slip." "I said I'm fine." He let her go, but he kept his eyes on her. There was something she was carrying, something heavy that did not show on her back but in her eyes. Quinn had seen that kind of pain before. That night, the wind blew hard through the cracks of the barn walls. Quinn was bedding down his mare when he heard a soft cry coming from behind the haystack. He stepped quiet, boots barely crunching the straw, and there she was. Penelope. Curled up, knees pulled to her chest, trying to muffle her sobs. He crouched down, not too close. "You all right?" She wiped her face fast, angry that he saw her like this. "I did not know anyone was in here." "Storm's loud. Can hardly hear my own thoughts," he said gently. "You want me to go?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No." They sat in silence, the kind that stretched and folded but did not feel heavy. After a while she whispered, "I do not know what love feels like." Quinn looked over at her, his voice low and steady. "Then let me show you slow." She turned her head, eyes red but searching his face. "Why would you do that?" "Because something in you's still standing. And I think you deserve more than whatever made you this sad." Penelope looked away, jaw clenched. "My husband left 3 winters ago, took off with a woman out of Kansas City. I had 2 children. Ruth was 6. Raymond was 4. Her voice cracked. "They died of fever while he was gone. I buried them alone." Quinn swallowed. That kind of loss, he could not imagine it. "I am sorry." She nodded like she had heard those words too many times and they had lost meaning. "I left Missouri after that. Could not stay in that house, not with their things still in the corner and no laughter left." Quinn reached into his coat, handed her a handkerchief. "You ain't gotta explain yourself to me, but I am glad you are here." She blinked, surprised. "Why?" "Because you're still breathing. Still waking up. That counts for something." Penelope looked at the fabric in her hands, then at him. "I don't know how to be around people anymore." "Then we go slow," he said, voice soft. "No need to rush." The next morning he was waiting outside the boarding house with 2 cups of coffee. She glanced at him, confused. "You said slow." "This is slow," he said, offering one out. She took it, still unsure what to do with kindness. He walked her halfway to the saloon. Said nothing. Just walked beside her. By the end of the week she was waiting for him on the porch. People in town started whispering, but Quinn did not care. He had been alone a long time too. Lost his brother during the war, lost his father to a mining collapse. He had built his life back up, hammer by hammer, fence post by fence post. And now there was this woman with sad eyes and a fire he recognized. Days passed. Then weeks. Penelope started talking more. She laughed once and Quinn nearly dropped the reins in surprise. One afternoon, they repaired the boarding house fence together. She wore her sleeves rolled up, hands calloused but capable. He watched her from the corner of his eye. "You are staring," she said. "I like watching you work." She flushed and dropped her gaze. "No one's ever said that." Well, they should have. Later that evening they sat on the porch, side by side. The sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in fire. "You still want to go slow?" she asked. "I do. I think I like slow," she whispered. He touched her hand, just enough so she would know she could pull away if she wanted. She did not. Neither spoke for a long time, but the silence between them was no longer empty, and when she looked at him again, her eyes held something new. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. And for Quinn, that was enough. By late November, the mornings in Dry Creek came edged with frost, brittle and pale. The cottonwoods along the creek had dropped their leaves, and the air carried that dry hush that came before snow. Quinn leaned into the saddle cinch of a neighbor's gelding, leather creaking under his grip. From the corner of his eye, he spotted Penelope stepping out of the mercantile with a bolt of muslin tucked under one arm and a small jar wrapped in brown paper under the other. She moved with a steadier rhythm now, not fast, not careless, just sure. "You mackin' something?" Quinn asked as she passed. She looked down at the cloth. "Curtains," she said. "Boarding house windows are bare as bones." He straightened, brushing dust from his gloves. "Let me help hang 'em when you're done." She hesitated. "You ever put up curtains before?" He squinted toward the sky. "No, but I can hold a hammer and not hit my own hand, which is more than some men can say." She gave a quiet huff, not quite a laugh. "We'll see if you're still that confident when you're knee-deep in pins and thread." They walked together back toward the boarding house, her steps easing into his like a habit taking root. The first snow hadn't fallen yet, but the sky had that thick gray weight to it, like it was thinking about it. Inside, she spread the muslin across the table in the parlor. The boarding house was quiet, most folks out working or huddled over stew in the cafe. Quinn stood near the stove, watching her measure and cut with careful fingers. "You were taught to sew?" he asked. She didn't look up. "My mother had 7 sisters. They all believed a needle could save a woman from ruin." She paused, then added, "Didn't save me." Quinn stepped closer, voice low. "Maybe not then. Doesn't mean it can't now." She threaded the needle without speaking, but her hands moved slower. After a moment she said, "I used to make dresses for my daughter's dolls. Each one had a name. She'd line them up on the porch railing and scold them like they were real." Quinn didn't move, just let the silence stretch between them. "I ain't said her name out loud since Missouri," Penelope murmured. Quinn waited. "Ruth," he nodded once. "That's a good name." Penelope swallowed. "I tried to burn her things before I left, couldn't. I packed them in a crate and buried it under the shed." "You ever want to talk about her?" he said. "I'll listen." Penelope tied off the thread, turning the cloth over in her hands. "I don't want to forget her voice." "You won't," he said quietly. "Not while you're breathing." She looked at him, then longer this time. Her eyes didn't flinch away. Later, as the sun dropped behind the hills, they stood on chairs and hammered curtain hooks into the wood above the windows. The muslin spilled down like pale water, softening the hard lines of the room. Penelope stepped back, brushing her hands together. "Not crooked," she said. "I expected worse." Quinn leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Told you I could handle a hammer." She looked at him, then up at the cloth. "They're plain, but they feel warmer than bare glass." He nodded. "Sometimes plain's the best kind of comfort." That night after supper he walked her up the stairs. At her door she paused, one hand on the knob. "Quinn," she said, voice soft, "you ever think about starting over?" He looked at her, really looked. "Every day since I met you." She opened the door slowly, then turned back. "I don't expect you to carry what I carry. But some nights it's too much for me alone." He reached for her hand, not pulling, just holding. "Then let's carry it side by side. You don't have to do everything alone." She didn't answer right away, but she didn't pull away either. "I'll see you in the morning," she whispered. He touched her knuckles with his thumb. "I'll be there." And when she closed the door behind her, it wasn't with the sound of shutting someone out. It was the sound of a door she might open again. Snow fell in the middle of the night, soft as sifted flour, blanketing Dry Creek in silence. By morning, the world beyond Penelope's window was pale and still, the kind of stillness that made every sound feel sacred. Downstairs, someone was chopping wood behind the boarding house, the rhythm steady and sure. She wrapped a shawl tight around her shoulders and stepped into the hallway, the floorboards cool beneath her slippers. Outside, Quinn split the last log and wiped his brow with his sleeve. His coat was dusted white, breath hanging thick in front of him. He looked over and gave a quiet nod as she stepped through the back door. "I didn't expect snow this soon," she said. "Me neither. But it's here, so I figured I'd stock the porch before it buries us." Penelope took the last few steps toward him, watching how his hands moved, careful, practiced. "You always work this early. Habit. Comes from starting days before daylight back on the ranch. Hard to shake." She glanced toward the stacked wood. "You miss it sometimes, but I'm not in a rush to go back." She let her arms fall to her sides. "What would you do instead?" He looked at her then, eyes steady. "Haven't figured it out yet, but I'm thinking clearer these days." Penelope knelt beside the pile, brushing snow from the top log. "You've got a way of making things feel less sharp." Quinn dropped the axe gently against the porch rail. "You've got a way of making staying feel like something I could do." They didn't speak for a stretch. She helped him stack the last of the wood, and they stood close while their breath mingled in the cold. Inside later, Mrs. Lyle's kitchen smelled of chicory and rising bread. Penelope poured 2 cups and carried them to the front parlor without asking if Quinn wanted one. He followed, brushing snow from his boots before stepping in. She set his cup on the small table by the window. "My father kept bees," she said. "He'd bring honey inside in clay jars, let us lick the comb once the harvest was done." Quinn sat across from her, curious. "That where you grew up, north of Carthage?" He built the hives himself. Said bees taught him patience. He ran a hand through his hair. "I never had much to do with bees." "I admire anyone who can." Penelope traced the rim of her cup. "I used to dream of starting a garden with hives nearby. Lettuce, beans, sweet peas climbing a fence. I don't know if I'll ever have that." "You could," he said. "Doesn't have to be a dream." She looked at him, unsure. "It's been so long since I let myself want anything." "Then maybe now's the time to start." She chewed her lip, thinking, "I'd need land, and tools, and time." "I've got tools and time." Her gaze lingered on his face. "Why would you help me with that?" "Because you've helped me remember what quiet feels like, what peace can be." She exhaled, slow. "I'm scared of wanting things again." "I'll be beside you whether you're sure or not." Her hand reached across the table, fingers brushing his, not by accident. Later that afternoon they walked the edge of the town, past the church and the schoolhouse, where the land opened wide toward the hills. Snow crunched underfoot, and the wind had softened to a hush. "There used to be a cabin here," Quinn said, pointing toward a flat stretch dusted in white. "Burned down 4 winters back, but the land's still good, creek's not far." Penelope turned in a slow circle, taking it in. "You know the man who owned it, passed on. No kin. Talk is the land still unclaimed." She was quiet a long time. "It's a start." Quinn turned to her. We could build something here. Together. Her eyes welled, not with sorrow this time, but something gentler like the first warmth after a long freeze. I don't know how to build a life from nothing, she said. You're not starting from nothing, he told her. You're starting from you. She stepped forward, close enough that their coats brushed. If I fall apart again, I'll be there to help you gather the pieces. She leaned into him then, not out of weakness, but because she wanted to. The snow kept falling, slow and steady, as if the world itself had decided to move at their pace. The thaw began quiet, like most changes worth trusting. By early March, the snow had pulled back from the edges of the creek, revealing damp earth and flattened grasses. Penelope stood at the edge of the clearing where she and Quinn had walked weeks before, the hem of her dress darkened with mud, her breath catching at the scent of wet pine and thawed soil. Quinn stepped beside her, holding a worn ledger and a tin pencil. 40 feet north to south, he said, tapping the page, and 30 across. That'll give us room for a stove, table, maybe even a wash basin if we can find the pipe iron. She tilted her head, studying the land, and a window facing east. He looked up from the page. Why east? I want the morning light, she said. Enough of my life's been lived in shadow. He didn't answer right away, just nodded and made a small mark on the page. They spent that afternoon pacing the boundary, driving stakes into the mud, stringing twine to mark the foundation. Her boots sank deep, but she didn't flinch. Quinn showed her how to read the slope of the land, how to tell where water would gather after rain, how to brace against wind from the northwest. You ever build anything before? She asked. Fences. A smokehouse once. Not much beyond that. What makes you think we can do this? He rested his hands on his hips. Because we already are. That night, she returned to the boarding house with dirt under her fingernails and a pull in her shoulders that felt more like purpose than strain. She sat by the hearth long after the fire had gone low, turning the ledger over in her lap. She'd written her name on the bottom corner of the plans in neat, careful script. It was the first time she'd signed her name to something in years. The next morning, Quinn brought her a canvas satchel with a set of chisels and a hand plane wrapped in oiled cloth. Found these in the back of the livery. Belonged to a man who owed me 2 winters ago. Never came back for them. Penelope unwrapped them slowly, fingertips brushing the polished handles. These are good tools. They'll be yours if you want them. She traced the edge of one blade. I do. Later that week, they began cutting timber from the ridge, hauling it down with borrowed mules. Penelope wore a bandana under her bonnet to keep the sawdust from her nose, and Quinn watched her swing the axe with a rhythm that matched his own. There was no talk of the past while they worked. Only the task, the wood, the slope of the land, and the sky above them. At midday, they rested under a pine, sharing bread and dried peaches. Quinn passed her a flask of spring water, then leaned back against the trunk with a sigh. You ever think about what you'd put on the walls? He asked. She looked at him, puzzled. What do you mean, if you had shelves, hooks, anything you wanted? What would you hang? She pulled her knees close. A tin mirror. My mother's shawl if I still had it, maybe a sketch of the creek. You draw, I used to. Ruth liked to watch me make pictures. Said I could turn a page into a story. He didn't smile, but his eyes warmed. That's worth putting back into your hands. She looked down at her fingers, the calluses forming at the base of her palm. I'm not her anymore. No, he said. But you're someone better. She didn't look up, but she reached for his hand, her thumb resting lightly over the back of his. He didn't move. When they stood to head back, she said, I want to build shelves wide enough for books. And a place for drying herbs. Quinn adjusted the harness on the mule. Then we'll make the walls strong enough to hold all that. Penelope walked beside him down the ridge, the canvas satchel slung over her shoulder, her steps steady. and Quinn, without needing to say it, knew she was walking toward something not away from it. The walls rose before the first green of April touched the hills. By then, Penelope's hands had grown accustomed to the weight of a hammer, the give of sapwood, the way pine knots fought against the nail. She no longer hesitated before she drove each one home. Quinn worked beside her, sleeves rolled to the elbow, voice low when he spoke, which wasn't often. They didn't need many words now. What passed between them moved in glances, in the shared rhythm of labor, in the way his hand steadied a board before hers could. They slept at the boarding house still, but their days belonged to the clearing. Each morning, she packed biscuits wrapped in cloth and tucked them into the basket with a wedge of hard cheese and a flask of boiled coffee. He always took the heavier load, but she never let him carry everything. One evening, after the rafters were set, Penelope stood inside the frame and ran her palm along the beam that would hold the weight of the roof. Her breath caught at the scent fresh cut pitch and warming earth. Behind her, Quinn leaned against the doorframe, watching the light shift across her face. "I've been thinking," she said. He waited. "I want to plant tobacco flower by the windows, and sweet alyssum. The kind that grows low and smells like honey when it warms. If it's what you want, we'll find the seed," he said. She turned, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Did you think this place would feel like it belonged to you?" He shook his head. "Didn't think I'd have a place that felt like it belonged to us." She stepped closer and placed her hand over his. "I'm not afraid of starting anymore, just afraid of losing it once I have it." His voice was quiet. "Then we hold it together. And if the wind tries to take it, we build again." The next day brought word from the land clerk in Miles City. Quinn rode out at dawn and returned by dusk with the papers folded into his coat. The land was theirs, 3 acres down to the creek bend, with grazing rights on the south slope. They signed the deed in the parlor of the boarding house, Penelope's hand steady as she pressed her name onto the page. Mrs. Lyle brought out a jar of preserved peaches and a chipped plate of molasses cake, setting it between them without a word. No one in town had expected it, but no one questioned it either. There was a quiet respect for things built slowly. That night, Penelope stood at the edge of their foundation as the stars came in, one by one. Quinn joined her, coat draped over her shoulders. She leaned into him, her temple resting just beneath his jaw. "I buried everything I had," she said. "I thought that was the end." He wrapped his arm around her. "It was the beginning of something else." She turned to face him. "Tell me what you want." He brushed a calloused finger along her cheekbone. "To wake beside you when the frost lifts, to build shelves for your books, to hear you laugh when you forget to be careful." Her eyes shone in the starlight. "I want that too." He kissed her then, soft and certain, the way a man does after a long winter of waiting. She kissed him back without fear. They moved into the cabin before the first hay was cut that summer. The walls were finished with whitewashed pine, the floor packed tight with sand and sawdust under the boards to keep out the chill. Penelope hung dried lavender from the rafters, and Quinn built her shelves along the east wall, just as promised. A neighbor gifted them a blue enamel stove. She wept when she lit the first fire in it. By August, her garden had begun to climb the fence. She planted beans and chamomile, tobacco flower and alyssum, and a single row of sweet peas along the southern edge. Quinn built her a bench from leftover timber, set it beneath the window where the morning sun reached earliest. One morning, she sat there with a sketchbook on her lap, pencil dancing across the page. Quinn stepped out with a tin mug of coffee and set it beside her without speaking. She looked up, eyes soft. "I drew Ruth," she said. "Not how she looked when I lost her, how I think she'd look now." He didn't ask to see it, just put his hand over hers and kissed her forehead, The following winter came with deep snow and long nights, but their cabin held warmth. She made candles from leftover tallow, and he carved a set of wooden buttons for her shawl. They read aloud from the books she'd brought west, and she taught him how to draw a face, though he claimed his dog looked more like a mule. And in spring, the tobacco flower bloomed again. They never spoke of Missouri or the war, not directly. But sometimes when the wind came in from the north and the creek ran high, they sat in silence and remembered what had come before. Not to grieve, only to honor. Years passed, slow and kind. The garden grew, the shelves filled. And every morning he brought her coffee, and she met him at the door with that same quiet smile. They lived like that, honest, hand in hand, until the lines on their faces deepened, and their hair turned silver at the edges. But they never stopped building, never stopped beginning together.